that is part of that purity of heart. If we aim and if we really work to see as God sees, in a sense, all becomes clear and all becomes beautiful, and it takes away any shame because you're not crossing boundaries that shouldn't be there. You are truly entering into the love of the Father.
Welcome to the Be Filled podcast. Together, we will explore the deepest desires of the human heart and how our Creator wants to fulfill your every longing. Join us as we explore the beautiful teaching of St. Pope John Paul II on the theology of the body. We are so excited you're here on the journey with us. Open your heart to be filled. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Be Filled podcast. My name is Rochelle Parker, and I'm here today once again with my beautiful friends, Katie Davis, Patty Strauss, and we have Sister back. I'm so thankful. We have Sister Cecilia Ann, and we are just continuing our study of John Paul II's teaching on the theology of the body. So we wrapped up chapter 2, and today we're going to talk about an appendix entitled The Ethos of the Body in Art and Media. And this is found in audiences 60 through 63 in the text. And these audiences really cover kind of a delicate subject, I would say. And I'm just actually so grateful that John Paul II goes here because it's such like a real application of everything that we've been learning so far in this text. So I'm very grateful. What he wants to do is explore the ethical dimension of both artists who depict the human body in art and media, as well as those who look at the human body in art and media, which would be, all of us, right? And he wants to really look at the question, is it possible to portray the human body while also upholding the dignity of the person? So we are going to jump in. We have 4 audiences, so I'm going to talk about the first 2, and then we'll discuss it, and then I'll talk about the last 2. So in audiences 60 and 61, John Paul II's first point is that we cannot separate this objective reality of the body from the personal subjectivity of human beings, male and female. And he goes on to say that when the body is depicted in art, we are in some sense separating the body from the actual person. And there is a risk there of not seeing the whole person, but just seeing an object to lust over. And so the reason John Paul II wants to examine this issue is in an effort to help us individually and really as a culture to create a climate favorable to purity. So that's kind of his goal, like why he's going there. He makes some really, I thought, interesting distinctions between different types of media and how, especially with film and photography, there's an increased chance of a person really being objectified there. And he says that is because when a person is photographed or filmed, this is a quote, they very often become an anonymous object. And he says that the mass spreading of the image via technology leads to anonymity, which is a way of veiling or hiding the identity of the person reproduced. So he specifically gives the example of like a nude photograph in a magazine. And then in audience 61, he begins talking about the spousal meaning of the body. So now he's going to kind of look at like, this is why it matters, right? We're meant to live in a reciprocal gift where one person gives themselves to the other and the other makes a choice, a decision to give themselves back, right? So when a person is reproduced in the media, they're really taken out of that communion of persons that we really belong to. And so this was a really good quote. It says, artistic objectification of the human body in its male and female nakedness leads to a transfer outside of this configuration of interpersonal gift that belongs originally and specifically to the body. The human body loses that deeply subjective meaning of the gift and becomes an object destined for the knowledge of many. And then the person who is presented can actually be taken possession of by someone that they don't actually have any relationship with at all. So that is the issue we have with it. But the Pope is really quick to say this is very delicate, and it's maybe not super black and white. Sometimes he's not saying that we can't depict the human body in art at all, but he's saying that this issue, he says, it's neither merely aesthetic nor morally indifferent. He reminds us of why we cover our bodies, why shame is now necessary to protect the goodness of our bodies, and then also so that we can become a moral culture. So, and he points out that really nobody wants to be objectified, right? And we don't really want other people to be objectified. But he then looks at okay, so when does it become pornographic in nature? And he really lays out kind of 3 criteria or 3 ways that it could become pornographic. First of all, it's when the artist oversteps the limit of shame or of personal sensibilities. Second, when the artist violates the body's right to intimacy, and what he means by that is being able to be protected by clothing, right? So when they are violating the body's right to intimacy and its masculinity and femininity. And then thirdly, when the artist violates that deep order of the gift and of reciprocal self-giving, which is inscribed in femininity and masculinity. So I'm really excited to just break this open with you guys and talk about what does this mean for our lives. So Katie, would you like to share first?
Sure. I love, that overview. And I think another way to frame it also is John Paul II is trying to create this atmosphere of favorable to the education in chastity. Okay, so to receive this education, I started just asking these questions in my head, will looking at a naked body tempt me too much? Is it possible to look at a body and be inspired instead of lustful? Can it bring me closer to God looking at a body instead of bringing me into sin? And then how do we create an environment where it seems like we're bombarded with these lustful images and still stay pure? So I may have answered no to all of those first questions, and then I'm still just bombarded everywhere. So it's almost how do I protect myself if I can't handle it, right? And so I listened to the Poco a Poco podcast, and if you're not familiar with it, it's a group of Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, CFRs, I had to look that up, and they talk about their lives just as priests and brothers, and their whole goal of the podcast is to make it very personable. And so I think they're really trying to get more vocation. So they're look, we're normal. It's fun,
Cool.
And so they really do a good job of bringing the listener into their everyday lives. And so I will never become a brother. So I'm their wrong target audience, but I'm still inspired by what they're saying, right? And so one podcast, they were talking about how difficult it was just to watch television and movies. And they were so we just don't do it at the house. They're however, we travel a lot. So when we're on a plane, we say our prayers, we do the rosary, and then there's still 3 hours left, right? And so there's this little screen in front of you with movies and television. And they were joking, everyone around us can see what we're watching, and we want to guard ourselves, right, in our chastity. And so they're cooking shows are really the only thing we can watch on a television show.
Perfect. Yeah, there's not too much to worry about.
No. And so they're it's kind of useless because we don't cook.
That's awesome.
But it brings up the point of we need to create a climate favorable to purity, as you said. And so it's how can we avoid situations where we're consuming entertainment where the body is being objectified? And so I think for each person it's different, but we certainly should be asking that question of ourselves. And so like when I went to Rome, I saw so many different beautiful paintings of nude bodies, and I had headphones on and they were telling me the story behind each painting. They were telling me what inspired the artist to paint that particular person or scene, and they were telling me how it related to something in the Bible or a major event that in the church. And so those nude bodies were beautiful. They were inspiring. They were moving. And so it's like there is a difference. And so on the bottom of page 366, John Paul II kind of describes this difference between painting or sculpture, in which the body kind of remains the model that gets reworked by the artist, and then film and photography, where there really is no changing of the model, right? And the living human is kind of being reproduced, and the person is kind of going from subject to object. And so in talking about like the need for shame, John Paul II really goes deeper into that norm. And he really is like, there's like a hidden like that. It's on page 369 of the text. He states that of the gift oriented toward the very depths of the personal subject or toward the other person, especially in the man-woman relation, according to the perennial order of the reciprocal self-giving. And so like, what does that mean? To me, what it means is when you're looking at an image or a film of a person's naked body and you're using it for your own selfish pleasure, you are making it impossible to enter into the gift exchange, right? Because just as you said, Rochelle, it's one-sided. It's for your pleasure only. There's no giving and receiving. There's just taking. It's not even receiving.
Right.
And so that's quite different than admiring a sculpture in a church and entering into the story of the subject of the painting and learning about the artist's intent behind the painting. In fact, like in the commentary, Christopher West says, like, the restoration of the Sistine Chapel, John Paul II insisted on moving several of the loincloths, and that the other clerics had painted over Michelangelo's original nudes. And at the restoration's dedication, John Paul II actually said that he described the Sistine Chapel as the sanctuary of the theology of the human body. I mean, how beautiful. I wish I would have known that when I was there. Because I was taking it all in. But I thought that Christopher just summarized that delicate balance. And on page 285, he says, "Herein lies the challenge for artists. If they are to portray the visible structure of the person, the human body, they must do so in a way that does not obscure, but brings to light the interior structure of the person." So the body cannot be separated from its soul. And so that's the ultimate litmus test, I feel like, is like Christopher gives us a hint. To obtain this is relatively rare and demands developed sensitivity. Like, it might not be on your airplane's, like, list of options.
Yeah, right.
It's rare. It's only the cooking show, people. No, I'm just kidding. What do you think, sister?
Well, actually, I'm very much in line with your thinking, and a lot of what I was thinking, you've already said. However, I will add a few thoughts. One is the fact that when I think of, like, you're in the Sistine Chapel or different places where you do see naked sculptures and figures and everything, what it made me think of is that whole purity of heart, going back to the original solitude, original nakedness, and everything. And so, original innocence, that when you see those bodies, it's almost like the artist takes you out of time. Like, you're not colonial, you're not the pioneers or whatever time period. That is just the person as the person, like as God intended. So I think there's a beauty in that. And then I think when I was reading through this, it made me think of our transcendental truths, the truth, beauty, and goodness, and those things are always there. And I was reading something, and Peter Kreeft said, "Everything that exists is in some way true, good, and beautiful. And human beings, via the image of God, being made in the image of God, are able to know the truth, desire the good, and love the beautiful." And so I think when we look at things, because I think even like you see a photo of someone in your family, you're not just seeing the person, not just the object, you're seeing all the love that goes into that relationship. And so it is when you look at paintings and so forth, if you can enter into why they made that, what it meant for them, and like you said, what is the subjective story that's being told, or for the artists themselves. So I think there's a real beautifulness in that. Peter Crefft went on to say, our present longing for truth, goodness, and beauty exists because these values reflect the ultimate course, which is God. When we pursue truth, goodness, and beauty in this life and in this world, we are tracking the majesty of the Lord. So who do we want to truly become? We want to become images of God. That's what we're called to be. And so we want to imitate our Father. And so I think that is, kind of our goal. One last thought was when we see the human body with the eyes of God, it made me think of the definition of wisdom. Wisdom is to see as God sees. So when we look at these beautiful works of art and everything, can we see as God sees? Because even when you look at the crucifixion, it's such a sadness, and yet there's a beauty in that too, because it is speaking of the love of the Father and of the Son. And so I think that is part of that purity of heart. If we aim and if we really work to see as God sees, in a sense, all becomes clear and all becomes beautiful, and it takes away any shame, because you're not crossing boundaries that shouldn't be there. You are truly entering into the love of the Father. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Patty?
That's so well said. I was trying to hold both these conversations, so I recapped them because there's so much here. And I think this is the first time that I've read this reflection, and I felt like John Paul II, is there a possibility? Is there any way that we can? Because there's such a reverence. I love the way that you said that. I love that, the true, the good, and the beautiful, that. And so when I was going through it, John Paul II reflected on that we actually have a deep yearning for the human body. And so for that, but what it really is that spousal meaning of the masculinity and the femininity that's inscribed in the interior. And that's what I hear you guys saying in such eloquence. And I actually almost really feel like I want all the viewers to look into this a little deeper, because I think the consequences of our culture missing this point. I feel like I've had a lot of teenagers, and the movies, the way that these things are portrayed, and they have the beautiful music, and deep inside, we know there's this yearning, but with the music and the relationships, kind of the truth is being blocked. And so I think for all of us viewing this, to take time to deeply reflect what we experience inside, and this idea of the human dignity that can't be replaced. It's so important that we get it, because with each one of our conversations with the others, with the kids that are watching, because when the couples on the screens are getting too intimate and they're not married, we forget that actually what they're doing is they're not renewing a marriage covenant where they're promised to each other. So they look like they're intentionally wanting to be close, and so there's all of that, and it's messy. So I find that I need to reread this, and it was hard to actually prepare because there's so much depth. And I think that there's this language here that we need to really get deeply within us, and then actually have conversations with youth, because they recognize it too. I have a 3-year-old grandson, and they're trying to potty train him, and so they got this idea, let's just let him run around naked so he's aware. But the little kid is like, no, and he runs and hides because he has this idea of his dignity already at 3, and we can fudge that out by watching the videos and not becoming aware of what's really in our heart, that is the dignity of the person, not just the human body. So anyway, I just please read and study more, and take this and what kind of pulls at you, and go a little deeper. You will not regret it. And then we all can do a lot to turn our culture around so it's more filled with the love of God. So.
Yeah, that's so good. Oh, thank you guys so much. I had really similar thoughts. I mean, one thing I was thinking about was that, this was delivered in 1981. And you think about technology
No
and
internet.
how no internet, people. And I mean, if you wanted to see something like pornography, I mean, you would have to like buy a magazine or go get a video. I mean, like, it's just a completely different world. And so I know, obviously, that it's so much more rampant, sadly, than it was in 1981, I would imagine. But yet his words are just so absolutely timeless and so important. And it doesn't really matter how much the technology has changed, because it's the same idea. And the people are the same, right? Regardless. So, but I could really almost sense his love for people, as I was reading it. I was like,
That's right.
this man is not condemning anyone. He's not condemning artists. He's not condemning anyone who's looked upon these things. He's just like imploring us, like, please know your dignity and the dignity of other people. I really felt that deeply as I was reading that. He wants us to not lose our humanity by looking at a person or looking at a body and not see the person, right? Because when we do start like realizing the dignity of the human person, like, it's not pleasurable to look at a body and use in that way, because you have to separate yourself totally from the fact that that is a person who is someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's mom, someone's friend. Like, you have to cut yourself off from that completely in order to look at someone and use them in that way. But then I was thinking, kind of similar to what you were saying too, Katie, like, it doesn't have to be pornography. And in fact, there doesn't even have to be nudity at all. I was like thinking about some of the shows that I used to watch, like in late high school and college, and I could not watch those now because they violate that third tenet that John Paul II outlines about violating the deep order of the gift and reciprocal giving. And so I was thinking about these shows, that like where people are just sleeping with each other and like it's portrayed as normal. And this is kind of what you were saying too, Patty. And it's so frustrating because it's funny and the characters you love, you love them. It's brilliant, like brilliant writing,
You're
hilarious.
like, wait, I grew up with this.
Yeah, why can't? But like, if I try to sit down with that now, I'm just like, all I can feel is like, ugh. I know this is not real, but they're portraying this in a way that like it looks fun and it looks kind of normal, So I don't know. I agree with you, Patty. Like, we all have to kind of like really go deeper and like examine our hearts. Like, what am I watching? And the same questions. I had almost the exact same questions you did about like, can I get closer to God? Would I invite the Lord? Would I invite Jesus to sit on the couch with me and watch this show or read this book with me, or whatever it is. So like I said, I just think that requires a little bit of interior work and just paying attention to the thoughts and feelings that you're having. I mean, I know for me, like, I'm still just like really sensitive about certain things, and like, I have to be honest, there just are things I can't watch because I feel like the enemy might use that in a way to sort of like lure me into like a fantasy or like into some temptation. So like, I think that there's an increased sensitivity that I have that I didn't used to have. Okay. And I think that really coincides with what John Paul II has said before about that. As you learn to live in step with the Spirit, you do become more sensitive about what's in line with your dignity and what's not, so it's a good thing. Right. But also sometimes you're like, why can't I just watch what everyone else is watching? Right. Because people will tell you they're watching all these awesome shows and you're like, I look it up.
Contribute to any conversation.
I know. And I'll like look it up. I use things that are really for parents, to review things for their children, for myself. Yeah. Because I'm like, can I watch this? Nope, can't watch it. So, but it's good. And I'm really grateful. And, I feel like having friends around you too that are like kind of on the same journey of seeking out that purity is very helpful. And people that you can say like, hey, I'm feeling kind of tempted right now, or I need help around this. Like that is so key. So, and I also thought some of you might be thinking, none of this stuff bothers me, like that's great for you, Rochelle. Like, you're thinking about that, but it doesn't really bother me. Well, I mean, that is between you and the Lord, but I would say, like, why does it not bother you? Like, that's a question to look at deeper. Like, maybe, like, am I that pure of heart that it doesn't bother me, or is my heart desensitized to all of this stuff? So I think that's sort of like the deeper question, but that is between you and the Holy Spirit. But I do encourage you to take some time with that. Okay, so now we go on to audience 62 and 63. And John Paul II, he's just kind of continuing. Again, this all just sort of like blends together. I just wanted to separate it out a little bit. But he talks about how we violate that meaning of the body, and the body can turn into public property, when in reality the human person is made to be in a very personal communion with another person. So he writes that when the human body in its nakedness is the object of art or film reproduction, the element of the gift is, so to speak, suspended in the dimension of an unknown reception and of an unforeseen response, and is thereby in some way threatened in the intentional order, in the sense that it can become an anonymous object of youth. So, I mean, this is kind of like repeating ourselves a little bit, but when someone's looking at another person's naked body and responding to that body outside the context of a real relationship, that's really a violation, right, of our dignity. So, so John Paul II is saying that, like, the limits around all of this are that exactly what we're talking about, that knowing the meaning of the body needs to be the limits that we set around how we present the body, and that artists have a responsibility around that. And I thought, I loved that. He was pretty passionate about that too, like calling them to something higher, which I thought was very Christ-like, actually. That he's saying, like, I'm not going to lower the bar. Like, here's the bar, and I'm calling you, not accusing, right? But I'm calling you to something higher. So he affirms the goodness of the topic of love between man and woman. There's a reason why this has been the topic of art and media forever, since the beginning of time, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually a gift and really good. But he says that an artist must, and he gives 3 things. He says you must be conscious of the full truth about man. Secondly, be conscious of the whole scale of values connected with the man. And third, live these values out in your own life. So that's a pretty high call. And he says, like, whatever's in the artist's heart is going to come out. So if you're pure of heart, then that's what you're going to create. And then vice versa, right? The other can be true as well. And he talks about how that nakedness in art can help us contemplate the goodness of the body. What you were sharing about the Sistine Chapel is just amazing. I really want to go there someday. But we do sense the difference, right? We can tell what the artist intended, whether this person is meant to be an object for enjoyment and use, or to bring you to a higher place in your contemplation. So he kind of ends it with giving the artist this choice. Like, are you going to present the human body in a way that is dignified and that leads someone to a higher place, like even closer to God and a deeper understanding of themselves and others? Or are you going to let them be an anonymous object to be lusted after? So I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Sister, would you like to share?
Oh, sure. Kind of segueing to what you just said, I thought it was so important when I talked about the artist reveals his inner values and so forth, his inner morals. But I was thinking of different people who may depict people. And I thought, honestly, even in illustrations, you think about a doctor, how do they learn about the veins and all these things? Someone was very artistic, and they drew things, they illustrated, where different organs are or whatever. And how we appreciate that. I'm so glad that doctors don't have to just guess. They have, very precise idea of how your body works. And just the beauty of that. So even those kind of illustrations show the beauty and the wonder of how God made us. So I think that is important. I think, when you see we see all kinds of depictions of, people who maybe have, very athletic, and we just are kind of in awe at their muscle tone and just maybe how tall they are, or how agile they are, so we see them and they can be depicted in a very beautiful way. And then again, it doesn't matter necessarily what they're wearing. It's just that we're admiring that they have taken their gifts and excelled to such a way. Or someone who plays an instrument, you can certainly just look at somebody's hands, one of my favorite symbols and art is the praying hands. And most times because they are a man's hands praying. And you can just think of, like I would always think of my dad, and just his hands were rough and rugged, but they worked hard to provide for a family. And so when I see those praying hands, what love. And as my dad got older, he prayed the rosary more often. At least I saw it more often because he was inside more often and he had more time. But how beautiful that was. And so I think there's those kind of things. I think it was important too when you think about intention, so it is, an artist can develop something and it's beautiful for two reasons. Hopefully because their intention was a pure of heart, but then can we receive it in that same way? So then we look at our intention, and we don't want to shun something because our intention's not pure when maybe the artist their intention was pure. So we always have to kind of guard ourselves, like I don't want to impose my my intentions on them. Christopher West I found very helpful in the second section, and on page 239 he says, the human body is not obscene, but what specifically attempts to stir concupiscence, that is what is obscene. And so it goes back to the intention. Quite often, I think of people who you see somebody do something nice. Well, are they doing something nice, helping pick up my books or something that I brought, just because they're nice people and they want to help me out? Or do they help me pick up my books and so forth because they want a favor from me? What if I do something nice for you? So those always intentions never leave. And then Christopher West goes on to say, the problem with pornography is that it reveals too little of the human person. Sees he or she is seen only as an object without true dignity, and it eclipses the gift. And I thought that was such a golden nugget, if you will. Pornography isn't about how much is shown, but how little is shown, and it's that gift that is not shown. And when we come back to that truth, beauty, and goodness, some of those things are just missing because of the concupiscence.
Okay, you stole my quote. I love that one.
That's such a good one.
So good. It was so good. But I think, I love rules. And I think here we're just really being encouraged not to create these black and white rules. I mean, really, that's what this whole book is about. If you think about it, that's the whole theology, is just looking into our heart. But we, again, going back to looking into the heart on both parts, like the artist part and then the end user of the art. And like just going back to the Sistine Chapel, like Christopher West continues on page 288 of his commentary, and he says, like, Michelangelo's nudes are not pornographic because he intended to reveal the spousal meaning of the body as a revelation of the Trinitarian mystery. Okay, so if you didn't know that when you were going through, you really have to wear the headset while you're looking at it, or have a guide when you're there. But it is quite clear, however, that he goes on to say, this is not the intention of pornographers who portray the naked body with explicit intention of rousing lust and profiting from concupiscence. And so by doing so, they explicitly violate what's called in Audience 62, the intimate and constant order of the gift and of reciprocal self-giving inscribed in the human being. So again, we're going back to that giving and receiving, and we have to just, in this instance, I feel like, especially for the rule followers, it's very easy to get into those Manichaean thoughts of like, the body is bad. Like, just don't look at anything, right? And all nude portrayals of the body can be twisted. Therefore, we need to avoid everything. And I think that again, I think that's where the quote comes in. It's like, no, it doesn't reveal too much. It reveals too little of the person. So like the artists just have to examine their hearts. And it reminds me, it takes me back to the tale of two bishops that we talked about in the earlier episodes. It's like, as, you know, a seductively dressed woman passed two bishops, one had to guard his eyes. He knew that as she was passing by, impure thoughts would come. And so he had to look away, whereas the other bishop could look at her and be moved by her and pray for her soul. And so, like, you wouldn't want the second bishop to look away, right? You would want him to see her as a person and to pour into her and offer up prayer for her. And so, like, that's why I think there just cannot be the black and white of here's what you can handle, here's what you can't handle. And so I think, you know, that general rule, if you cannot look and see the person made in the image of God, then it's best to look away and not consume that art. So that's kind of where it ended as my rule, even though he said don't have any rules.
It does. It kind of keeps us safe. I really appreciate that too.
We can have guardrails, though.
Yes.
That's important.
And I thought too, because you were saying that about really looking at the artist, you know, really looking at their intent, and in the commentary, I had to go to the commentary too, because it was almost too intimate in John Paul II's just straight up theology of the body. It was almost too much for me where I'm at in my life, because I wanted to ponder it more and more and bring that in. But he talks about in the commentary, Christopher West looked a little deeper into Michelangelo's. And did you read that part where he said he was creating with a purity of heart, and there was somebody that had criticized it and accused him of being, you know, inappropriate. And he got so frustrated because it never crossed his mind. It sounded like Michelangelo, it never crossed his mind that I'm only doing the work of God. This is so sublime. Like, just it tells me we can be so filled with purity of heart that we're not tempted towards. I love to know that we can have that standard, and that people around us can have that standard, to the point where he drew that person that was criticizing him as the little demon on the side. And I just thought that that's a point, because he still had a lot of emotions, but he was in such a different playing field. And our Bible is like that. It does touch onto the most intimate things. If you read the Song of Songs, again, I almost feel uncomfortable in a way sitting initially with the Song of Songs, because it's so intimate, but yet I do. And then it draws me deeper, and I just, because it is so sublime.
I was going to say, we're going to get there too.
And you know, but I took a theology of the body class, so it was my first real deep dive into this material. And Christopher West brought out a sculpture of, do you remember St. Teresa of Avila's Ecstasy?
Yes.
I was just stunned by my own reaction. It was like, and it was in this comment, it was in this reflection that I realized why I had a kind of a pulling back. I could not almost handle the intimacy. So the sculpture is where St. Teresa of Avila is in a real high level of her prayer. She's very close to union with our Lord. And she would receive these arrows of love. And in the sculpture, she's got this look of passion and in the reflection of what and it was just too intimate for me. I could hardly bear it. But when I was looking at this, I was like, you know, I think it's because I haven't really studied the relationship between our Lord and St. Teresa of Avila. So it was that there was something that was portrayed that I wasn't really ready to accept. So I think, like you said, when you go to the Sistine Chapel and you look up, try to fill yourself with what the intent is. And then conversely, realize they really normalize the fullness of the person in our movies and shows. And so that's not appropriate to look at, because they're not showing the whole person. So all of that just plays in. And so again, just really try to go deeper in this, because you won't be sorry.
Yeah, that's so true. Wow. Oh, is it back to me? I was so enthralled in what you guys were saying. I completely lost track of where we were. Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny that you brought that up about Teresa of Avila, because we read The Interior Castle. You remember that? I'm telling you. There were parts of that when you get to probably where she was there, deep, deep in her prayer life that I was like, I almost blushed. I mean, she's talking about her intimacy with God, but it's like, you remember that? Mm-hmm. It was like you almost felt like, this is too intimate for me to even read.
Should I be reading this? Is what I thought.
It makes me very emotional, actually, but it's very powerful because it makes you recognize, like, whatever little, like, temptations we might have, or like however we're drawn, to lust or whatever, like, that what we're after is what she has, And so if we can know that and bring that to prayer and be like, Lord, no, I want you. Like, I want to be in ecstasy with you and filled with you. I mean, that's some powerful stuff. Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. I would recommend anyone to read that, but maybe with a friend. You can talk about it. It's crazy.
Or spiritual director.
Oh, a spiritual director would be even better. And then again, like, as we've been talking about, kind of doing an examination of conscience about what you are consuming, I just want to say that if you are struggling with this, like if you find yourself stumbling and falling and watching things that are not in line with the dignity of the person, just know, like, you're not alone, and we're praying for you. And also, there are a lot of really good supports out there. So I was thinking I would put some resources in our show notes too. Like, if this is something that you're really wrestling with in your life, don't think that you have to just figure it out by yourself, because you really can't. So I just want to put that out there too. But this was just such a great conversation. It was just so good. I almost forgot we were recording. Just like hanging out with you guys. This is actually how we talk to each other all the time. It really is. But that's really all the time we have for this episode. Next episode, we're starting a new chapter, which is really exciting, called Christ Appeals to the Resurrection. You do not want to miss it. This is going to get into some really good stuff. Also, I just want to remind you that we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube. So be sure to subscribe, share with a friend, so that you don't miss any episodes. If you are enjoying this, we just love for anyone to come on the journey with us. So we appreciate you all so much. Thank you so much for listening. And until the next episode, God bless.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. We can be reached by email at befilledpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. There you can find additional encouragement in between episodes. Also, be sure to check out our show description for links to resources we discuss in the show, as well as questions for deeper reflection. Until the next episode, God bless.